Welcome to The Hill's Coronavirus Report. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Each day we are interviewing consequential leaders and innovators in the battle against the coronavirus. In all the world, the state of New York has been the hardest hit by COVID-19, with more than 337,000 cases and 21,000 deaths. In addition to New York City, Long Island has also been hard hit. But today that area can report some good news. In the past few days, Long Island isn't last among areas in New York which are eligible for reopening after the statewide shutdown. In 1 week, the region went from meeting only 2 out of 7 benchmarks to now meeting 5. As with most of us, while the public health news seems to be getting better, the economic outlook is still tough. Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has said states might consider bankruptcy as an option. But hard-hit Suffolk and Nassau counties in New York see the need for the Fed's involvement in reviving state and local economies. One GOP congressman says it's all about perspective, and bankruptcy is not an option. From the great state of New York, Congressman Lee Zeldin serves on both the House Financial Services and Foreign Affairs committees. He represents the 1st Congressional District. Welcome, Congressman Zeldin. Great to be with you. You are also a member of the President's Task Force on Reopening the Economy. And so let me just ask, you're in the hot zone. You've had an enormous footprint of COVID-19 in your communities. What do you think it's going to take to get the high trust environments that workers and consumers and your community want to have as we think about reopening the economy?
We want to reopen smartly and precisely. We want to do so in a way that prevents another outbreak. That includes the ability to do diagnostic testing, the ability to do antibody testing, also for the individual business owner to utilize its own mitigation efforts, not just to protect their own employees, but also the public. One example is a retail store that might be able to open. If the retail store is able to do curbside pickup, that would allow that business to start making money again and for those employees to get back to work. And at the same time, prevent the densely populated scenario inside their store to be avoided. So it's not just what government does at all levels, but it's also what businesses will do, as well as the steps that individuals will do to make it possible to continue that reopening along the phases.
You have been an active part of the legislation, the various care packages and the care legislation that have come out, the various dimensions of that. What do you think Congress still needs to do that it hasn't done so far?
Well, we want to drive additional support, for example, to state and local governments. I have governments in the 1st Congressional District between Albany, the state capital, our county, our towns, our villages. They're on the front lines of this fight against coronavirus. And they're seeing hits not only with coronavirus-related expenses, but also with revenue losses. And because of coronavirus, directly because of coronavirus, you're seeing these gaps being blown much larger in their budgets. Maybe some of these governments were cash-strapped going into this. I understand that. But this is about survival. Bankruptcy is not an option. Some of these local municipalities are run by Republicans. It's not just Democrats. And you have great bond ratings. Some of these local governments were in very sound fiscal shape going into this. But unfortunately, right now, because of both the hits on the revenue side and the expenditure side, they need help. And that's just one example. You'll have small businesses in need of additional support. You'll have hospitals in need of additional support, whether it's education, K through 12, or higher ed. All of this should be on the table for a discussion, again, being about survival, not fortune.
Yesterday, I spoke to Senator John Barrasso, and the senator told me that there had been $150 billion appropriated to state and local governments that hasn't even gone out yet, so that he thinks it's too early to begin looking at more money right now. Do you think he's wrong? What are the aspects of this that you think that those people in that camp don't understand about this moment?
Well, I would say a few things. One is that the funding formula under the CARES Act only allows the money to be spent for COVID-19 related expenses. So the funding formula needs a bit more flexibility. Two is that the CARES Act caps the population threshold at 500,000,
Hmm.
which means that Brookhaven Town, which is the largest town in my congressional district, with a population of 480 something thousand people, they haven't gotten any direct aid as a result of the CARES Act. So driving support to that lower level of government is important as well, and some additional funding because while it was helpful, what the CARES Act sent, for example, to Suffolk County in the first congressional district, they still need additional support. So even for some of those uh, levels of government above 500,000, they need more help.
Now, the president's former Homeland Security advisor, Tom Bossert, has said we need to stop testing the ill and we need to test the well. That the way to get around this is that we've got to go in and look for those asymptomatic cases. Yesterday, I learned that in San Antonio, they're inviting people that are asymptomatic to come in and get tested. The governor of Wyoming, Mark Gordon, is much doing the same thing, asking people, go get tested if you have any inkling that you may have come into an encounter with someone. So not just looking at symptoms. I'm interested in whether New York is anywhere near that threshold that it can begin thinking about testing asymptomatic people and opening that, which everyone tells me that that's just a vital part of getting us back to work.
Oh, I very much agree with the need to be testing individuals, not only those who are most ill, but also those individuals who are asymptomatic. When you hear of community spread, it's not just from that individual they come in contact with who's showing symptoms, but the community spread that's been happening over the course of the last few months since this all started, in many cases, was directly resulted by coming in contact with people who are showing no symptoms. So, where there was a policy at the beginning of this, where there was a limited amount of tests, and tests can only be given at that time, they say, to individuals who were showing symptoms or they came in direct contact with other people who tested positive. Now that we've seen testing capacity increase as much as it has daily, where several 100,000 tests now can be conducted each day in the United States, we need to look at the next level, the next phase of how testing should be conducted. And that would certainly include the ability to identify people who are asymptomatic.
Today, Dr. Anthony Fauci is testifying remotely in the U.S. Senate, and he's issuing a lot of cautionary warnings about moving too quickly on reopening around the country. And I know we have an uneven patchwork about that will look like. But he's saying that because he is worried that there are too many places that are going to jump the gun. They're going to get out there a little bit earlier. Where are you in that? I mean, because I know that some people have been looking at Dr. Fauci as having too much political weight in this equation. Where are you on his messaging and his worries?
I certainly wouldn't want to paint the entire country with the same broad brush, which means even in a place like New York, you might see parts of upstate reopening this week in the coming days, and maybe there'll be other parts of upstate or other parts downstate that might be reopening in the days and the weeks after that. So as you see with New York, where all different parts of the state are trying to meet these 7 different dimensions, these 7 factors for entering into that phase 1. I think that that's a better approach than telling people upstate that they have to wait until every corner of New York is ready to move into that next phase, which, by the way, was part of the discussion at one point. Part of this discussion at one point was that New York was going to reopen with all of the surrounding states. It was going to be a regional plan where everybody was reopening at once. So to Dr. Fauci's point, to whether it's the CDC guidance, the White House task force, the president, governors, it seems like everyone is on the same page in understanding that you can't paint the entire country with the same broad brush and that you have to look at conditions on the ground and the ability with regards to testing and hospitalizations and death rate and your hospital bed capacity and other factors where you're trying to reopen as quickly as possible, but also as smartly as possible.
I want to ask you a question. I'm not sure there's a good answer to it, but we are in a political season, and one of the things that has struck me in the many interviews I've done is I'm talking to human beings that are dealing with lots of people in pain and struggling with this from a lot of different corners, Democrats, Republicans, independents, whatever they may be, but yet you still have to, if you're running for office, define yourself about a set of issues and values and what you stand for and run. How do you run for office and not seem like it's a cynical course when you've got so much going on out there? I mean, it's sort of, everyone's doing it, of course, but I'm just interested in how you think about that.
I think you have a lot of different kinds of districts around our country. In certain districts, you have a 0% chance of getting elected if you support the President of the United States. You have other districts where you have a 0% chance of getting reelected if you feel otherwise. I mean, we have very red districts, very blue districts, and we have purple districts in between. So if you were going to get into the politics of how people approach different issues, relationships with colleagues in their own party and the opposite party, ideology, whether it's fiscal issues or immigration or foreign policy, I would say you really can't look at every district equally. This morning, there was a bipartisan index that was released by the Lugar Center and Georgetown University. Every year, they rank the bipartisanship of members of both the House and the Senate. I was honored to be ranked 12th through all of the formulas that they go through in deciding bipartisanship. And it was a pretty even split. And the top 30 of that list was about half Republican and half Democrat. Bipartisanship is very important for me, for my district, for my region. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't stand up for what you believe in. There's time for debate, for spirited debate on issues that have to be vetted out. Disagreement is okay in our country, but you also have to have a willingness to work with the other side to find common ground however possible. That's how you're going to move our country forward the best.
You're a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and China is the big part of this equation we're struggling with. China is now a matter of political debate, what they did in the early stages of coronavirus. What do you think we should be doing right now with regards to China and this pandemic?
Well, for one, step one is about issues and investigation and answers. We have questions. There are issues related to early detection, one, and for us to understand why China was censoring social media content, why China was forcing confessions and putting criminal charges on individuals who wanted to tell China and the world about what they were seeing, why they weren't letting the public know about human-to-human transmission. Why was the World Health Organization utilizing Chinese Communist Party talking points as we were going through those first few critical weeks? That's one component of this, is early detection. Another component, another issue, more questions with regards to PPE and ventilators, our supply chain. What should we be doing to be prepared for a next pandemic better than we've been prepared for any pandemic in the past, to ensure that we don't have to rely on foreign countries like China for ventilators, for PPE, and to the maximum extent possible, medicines as well. Between our national stockpile, our state stockpiles, and an emergency domestic manufacturing plan, we should have an ability within our own borders to be prepared for the next pandemic. So I believe as it relates to China and the questions that are outstanding, the issues that are before us, we have those that are related to coronavirus. And also what we shouldn't lose sight on is that there were really important issues for us to be talking about before coronavirus hit. We should be concerned about economics and trade. We should be concerned about cybersecurity. We should look at patent IP infringement and other ways that through Huawei and the development of 5G and that race that's ongoing. There are so many components of that U.S.-China relationship that are really important independent of coronavirus. And because of politics, we should not be censoring a conversation where we're not having any hearings on these topics. Let's talk about the coronavirus related issues and the non-coronavirus related issues regarding a country that you could argue is our largest geopolitical threat at this moment in time.
Just real finally, I really appreciate your candor on that. Congressman Will Hurd made a comment the other day I was very struck by. He said, look, we can't just think about recovery. We need to think about advancement, that we need to think about 5G. We need to think about technology and cyber. But rather than going back to where we were in November 2019, we have to put the resources and will to move this forward so that we're safer and better, but that there's more agility and more capacity in the United States. Do you support that sort of approach of advancing the economy as opposed to recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be our goal to recover stronger than we've ever been. Recovery is also about rebuilding. It's also about advancement. And I agree with that point you just referenced. That you're saying that Will made on your show, that we should be looking to the future as we're tackling these issues, not to go back into time, but to go forward stronger and for our country to be the best version of itself, for our economy to rebound as quickly as possible to get people back to work. But also, as you reference 5G and Huawei, this is an issue for the future. We'd be doing a real disservice for our own national security interests and other dynamics if we were looking at the 5G and Huawei issue as an issue of the past as opposed to an issue of the future.
Well, Congressman Lee Zeldin, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're safe and thank you for all the work you're doing for your constituents. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you all for joining me today. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.